the plane was spotted banking sharply, with its wings striking a bridge before plunging into the water. Some debris from the aircraft even struck a taxi, injuring the driver, who was sent to the hospital. More than 30 people lost their lives, while a dozen or more survived. The search for missing bodies is ongoing. What should have been a routine flight became a nightmare in just 3.5 minutes. Within this short time, a series of events unfolded, resulting in a tragic crash into the Keeling River. The impact broke the plane into pieces. Immediately, 43 of the 58 people on board, including 4 crew members and 39 passengers, perished. What went wrong during those critical minutes? What sequence of actions led to such a devastating outcome? To find out, we need to go back to the moment when things began to spiral out of control. This is the story of TransAsia Airways Flight 235. On February 4th, 2015, at 10:45 a.m. local time, TransAsia Flight 235 began its journey. It pushed back from the gate, preparing to fly to Kinmen, an island off Taiwan's coast. The flight from Taipei's Songshan Airport to Kinmen typically lasts about 50 to 60 minutes. The aircraft involved in the incident was an Atra 72-600, a newer model, compared to the Atra 72-500, both of which were in TransAsia Airways fleet. This particular plane was manufactured in 2014 and had accumulated about 1,600 flight hours. Powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney engines, the plane was set to make 2 return flights from Songshan to Kinmen on the day of the accident. The flight crew was composed of 3 members. The pilot in command, Captain Liao Jiangshong, aged 42, took the left seat. He had logged nearly 5,000 flight hours, though only 250 of those were on the Atra 72-600. After completing 2 earlier flights without any problems, this third flight, which carried 58 people, would end in disaster. Captain Liao had previously served in the military before transitioning to civilian aviation. During his transition training, he encountered difficulties with multitasking, making decisions under pressure, and managing emergency situations. These challenges led to his training being terminated at one point. However, Captain Liao later joined TransAsia Airways in August 2010 and successfully completed his first officer training. Despite some issues, he eventually passed his final exams and was promoted to captain after additional training. Still, concerns remained about his ability to handle high-stress situations, particularly during engine failures. TransAsia Airways offered remedial training, but there wasn't a robust system in place to regularly review pilot performance. This oversight allowed certain weaknesses to persist, posing potential safety risks. Sitting beside him in the right seat was Captain Liu Xikong, a 45-year-old pilot with nearly 7,000 flying hours, 794 of which were on the Atra 72-600. In the jump seat was 63-year-old First Officer Ping Chong, who was on an observation flight as part of his training. Ping had over 16,000 flight hours, although only 8 of those were on the Atra 72-600. After starting both engines, the crew began taxiing toward the runway for takeoff. They were instructed to follow the Musha to Quebec departure procedure, which required a right turn and a climb to 5,000 feet. This departure plan also included an engine-out standard instrument departure (EASID), a specific route for situations where an engine fails shortly after takeoff. Following this route ensures the aircraft can avoid obstacles, even when operating with just one engine. While taxiing, the pilot monitoring explained to the first officer the differences between the Atra 72-600 and the older Atra 72-500 model. This conversation, though informative, was a violation of the sterile cockpit rule, which mandates that non-essential communication be avoided during critical phases such as taxiing. These distractions may have contributed to the omission of a proper pre-takeoff briefing, which could have been crucial later on. At 10:51 a.m., the aircraft began its takeoff roll from runway 10. Just 4 seconds into the takeoff, the pilot monitoring noticed something unusual: the APSIX, or Automatic Takeoff Power Control System, wasn't armed. Despite this, the pilot flying, Captain Liao, chose to continue the takeoff rather than aborting it. His decision-making in this moment remains unclear, but it's possible that his familiarity with the Atra 72-500, where continuing takeoff in such situations was permitted, influenced his actions. Unfortunately, on the Atra 72-600, failing to arm the APS requires a rejected takeoff. The APS is a vital system that assists pilots during takeoff by automatically managing engine power. If the system detects a loss of power from one engine, it triggers a sequence that feathers the failed engine's propellers to reduce drag and boosts the power of the operational engine by 10%, giving the aircraft a better chance of safely completing the takeoff. On older Atra models, pilots could continue takeoff even if the APS wasn't armed. However, on the Atra 72-600, this practice was unsafe, and a takeoff should have been rejected if the system failed to arm properly. As the aircraft climbed, the landing gear was retracted, and the crew set the autopilot for a climb to 5,000 feet at an airspeed of 115 knots. The aircraft had reached about 1,000 feet when the master warning alarm sounded, indicating an engine failure. Engine 2 had flamed out, and the crew initiated the appropriate procedure. What they didn't know was that the engine hadn't failed because of pilot error, it had malfunctioned due to a defect in the engine's auto-feathering system, specifically because of faulty soldering in the system's circuit. This defect caused Engine 2's propellers to feather unnecessarily, reducing its thrust, while Engine 1's power was increased. A few moments later, the autopilot disengaged, and the pilot flying took manual control of the aircraft. In the chaos of the situation, the pilot flying mistakenly identified the wrong engine as the faulty one. Instead of focusing on the malfunctioning Engine 2, he reduced the power to Engine 1, the only engine still functioning properly. As the aircraft continued its climb, it reached an altitude of 1,630 feet, which was its highest recorded point during the flight. At this point, the indicated airspeed had dropped to a dangerously low level, nearing the threshold for a stall warning. The aircraft began to lose altitude rapidly, and the stall warning persisted for several seconds, accompanied by the activation of the stick shakers devices that provide physical feedback to the pilots, warning them of an imminent aerodynamic stall. In a moment of confusion, the pilot flying pulled back the throttle on Engine 1, bringing it to idle power, while also increasing the throttle on the already feathered Engine 2. This action caused the aircraft to lose even more altitude, and the plane entered a left bank as it descended at an alarming rate. Both engines were now effectively shut down, and the aircraft continued its rapid descent toward the ground. The crew attempted to restart the engines multiple times but failed to recover power. At an altitude of just 545 feet, the aircraft began to bank sharply to the left. The plane's left wing collided with a taxi on a bridge before continuing its descent into the Keelung River, flipping upside down on impact. The crash resulted in the deaths of 43 out of the 58 people on board. Among the survivors were 13 passengers and 1 cabin crew member. The taxi driver, whose vehicle was struck by debris from the plane, was seriously injured but survived. Both the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were recovered, providing vital information for the investigation. The crash was determined to have been caused by a combination of a technical malfunction in Engine 2's auto-feathering system and pilot error. The crew's confusion in identifying the faulty engine, compounded by a lack of proper communication in the cockpit, led to the shutdown of the functioning engine. The plane entered a stall from which it could not recover, resulting in the tragic loss of life. This crash marked TransAsia Airways' second fatal accident within a year, ultimately leading to the airline's closure.